They say an omega without a mate is nothing but dead weight waiting for the grave. I used to believe that lie. Then I got rejected in front of the entire Blood Moon pack, my wrists broken by the man who swore we were fated, and left bleeding in the snow like yesterday's trash. That was 3 months ago. Now I'm hunting something far more dangerous than acceptance. I'm hunting survival. And tonight, in the heart of a blizzard that could kill a full-grown alpha, I'm about to save the life of a king who doesn't even know I exist. Stick around until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is out there listening. The wind cut through Celine's cloak like frozen knives, each gust reminding her that the Northlands didn't care about broken hearts or shattered bonds. 3 months since Marcus Thorne had stood before the entire Blood Moon pack and spoken the words that still burned in her chest like silver poison. I, Marcus Thorne, reject you, Celine Vera, as my mate and future Luna. 3 months since her wolf had howled so loud inside her skull she thought her head would split open. 3 months since she'd felt the phantom bond snap like a rope under too much weight, leaving a scar across her soul that throbbed with every heartbeat. 3 months of walking. Celine pulled her hood tighter against the blizzard, her fingers numb despite the threadbare gloves she'd traded for 2 days ago. The village of Kael's Ridge was still 5 miles south, but she wouldn't make it before nightfall. Not in this storm. The smart thing would be to dig a snow shelter and wait it out. But Celine had stopped doing smart things the night Marcus shattered her wrist to make sure she couldn't cling to him during the rejection ceremony. Her healing gift had mended the bones. It couldn't touch what he'd broken inside. The forest pressed close on both sides of the narrow path, ancient pines groaning under the weight of ice and snow. Celine's breath came in short gasps, her lungs burning from the cold. She was stronger than she looked. Had to be. Omegas didn't survive alone in the Northlands without developing a spine made of iron and a will that refused to quit. She'd learned to trade her healing skills for food, for shelter, for the occasional threadbare coat some pitying beta would offer. She'd learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut. She'd learned that the world didn't care about fate or fate or any of the pretty lies the elders told young wolves about destined mates. The world cared about survival. And Celine Vera was still breathing. A sound cut through the howling wind. Low, pained, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakable to ears trained by years of tending the sick and wounded. Someone was dying out here. Celine stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smart thing was to keep walking. The dying were none of her business. She had maybe an hour of daylight left, and a storm that could kill her if she didn't find shelter. The sound came again, a whimper that raised every hair on the back of her neck. Damn it! Celine left the path, pushing through snow that came up to her knees. Her legs screamed in protest, but she ignored them. 20 feet into the trees, she found the source. A massive black wolf lay in a hollow between 2 fallen logs, his dark fur matted with blood and ice. Even half dead and covered in wounds, he was the largest wolf Celine had ever seen. Easily twice the size of Marcus in his shifted form, the kind of wolf that should have been leading a pack, not bleeding out alone in a blizzard. Celine dropped to her knees beside him, her healer's instincts overriding common sense. His breathing was shallow, labored. She could see at least 4 deep gashes across his shoulder and flank, the edges black with infection. No, not infection. Silver poisoning. Her stomach dropped. Silver wounds didn't happen by accident. This wolf had been attacked, hunted. The weapons used were meant to kill slowly, painfully. She reached out, her hand hovering over his massive head. His eyes cracked open. Gold. Bright as summer sun and sharp with intelligence, even through the haze of pain. Those eyes locked on hers and the world tilted sideways. The bond slammed into her chest like a fist made of lightning and fire, and something so ancient it didn't have a name. Not the fragile thread she'd felt with Marcus. This was a chain, forged in starlight and tempered in blood, unbreakable, undeniable. Mate. The word echoed through her skull in a voice that wasn't hers, deep, commanding, barely conscious but absolutely certain. No. No, this wasn't possible. She'd been rejected. The bond with Marcus had burned away. Wolves didn't get second chances at fated mates. The moon didn't work that way. The black wolf's eyes started to close again. He was dying. Celine's hands moved before her brain caught up. She ripped off her gloves, pressing her palms against the worst of the silver wounds. Her healing gift surged up from somewhere deep in her core, that well of power she'd been taught to use sparingly, to never drain completely. Life Weaver magic wasn't common. Most healers could mend flesh, set bones, chase away fever. Life Weavers could pull the dying back from the edge of the void. But it cost. Every life saved took something from the healer: energy, vitality, years off a lifespan that was already shorter than most wolves. Her instructors had beaten that lesson into her skull. Never give more than you can afford to lose. Never drain yourself dry for a stranger. Celine closed her eyes and poured everything she had into the wolf beneath her hands. The silver fought back. It always did. Silver was anathema to shifter magic, designed to corrupt and destroy. Her gift wrapped around the poison, pulling it up and out through the wounds like drawing venom from a snakebite. The black blood turned red. The infection retreated. The gashes began to close. Celine's vision blurred. Her hands shook. Too much. She was giving too much. But she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. This wolf, this stranger, this impossible mate, was not going to die in the snow because she was too weak or too scared to save him. The last wound sealed shut. The wolf's breathing steadied, deepened. Celine pitched forward, her forehead pressed against warm fur that smelled like winter storms and ancient forests, and something she couldn't name but knew she'd been searching for her entire life. "Mate," her wolf whispered again, content for the first time since the rejection. Celine tried to respond, but the darkness was already pulling her under. The last thing she felt was the wolf shifting beneath her, bones cracking and reforming. The last thing she saw was a man's hand, strong and scarred, catching her before she hit the frozen ground. The last thing she heard was a voice like gravel and smoke. "You saved me, healer. Now let me return the favor." Then nothing. Warmth. That was the first thing Celine noticed. Not the biting cold that had been her constant companion for 3 months. Not the ache in her bones or the gnawing hunger in her belly. Just warmth. Deep and encompassing and so foreign she thought she might still be dying. Her eyes opened slowly. Silk. She was lying on silk sheets. The ceiling above her was vaulted, made of dark stone shot through with veins of blue crystal that pulsed with soft light. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting battles and ceremonies and wolves running beneath a full moon. This wasn't Kael's Ridge. This wasn't anywhere she recognized. Celine sat up too fast. The room spun. Her stomach lurched. Strong hands caught her shoulders, easing her back against a mountain of pillows. "Stay still. You drained yourself to the edge of death. Your body needs time to recover." The voice from the forest. Celine's head whipped toward the speaker and her breath caught in her throat. The man sitting beside her bed was built like a warrior carved from granite and bad intentions. Tall enough that even seated he dominated the space. Shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a kingdom. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, pulled back from a face that looked like it had been designed to make enemies reconsider their life choices. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. Gold. The same impossible gold she'd seen in the wolf's eyes. "You," Celine whispered. The man inclined his head, the ghost of a smile touching his mouth. "Velor Drakar, King of the Northern Empire. You pulled me back from the void, healer. I'm in your debt." "King." The word rattled around in Celine's skull, refusing to make sense. She'd saved a king. She'd felt a mate bond with a king. A man who ruled the largest territory in the Northlands, who commanded thousands of wolves, who could have anyone he wanted. A man who was staring at her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "I didn't know," Celine said, hating how weak her voice sounded. I heard someone dying. I couldn't walk away. Most would have." Velor leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm. The assassins used silver-laced blades coated in wolfsbane. Any normal healer would have taken one look at those wounds and left me to die. But you didn't just heal me. You used life weaver magic, old magic, forbidden magic in most territories. "It's not forbidden where I'm from," Celine said quietly, "just discouraged." "Because it costs the healer," Velor said. His eyes narrowed. "How much did saving me cost you, Celine Vera?" Her name in his mouth sent a shiver down her spine. "How do you know my name?" I know many things about you. Valor stood, moving to the window. Dawn light filtered through frost-etched glass, painting him in shades of gold and shadow. I know you're from the Blood Moon Pack. I know you were rejected by their alpha's son 3 months ago. I know you've been wandering the territories alone, trading your gift for scraps. He turned back to face her, and something in his expression made her chest tight. I also know that you are my true mate, and judging by the way you looked at me in that forest, you know it too. Celine's hands fisted in the silk sheets. That's not possible. I was already rejected. The bond burned away. Wolves don't get second mates. Wolves don't, Valor agreed. His voice dropped, going rough around the edges. But you're not just a wolf, are you, Celine? Life weavers are touched by the old magic, the same magic that predates the moon herself. And I'm not just any alpha. He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. When he reached the edge of the bed, he crouched down so they were eye level. I'm descended from the first pack, the original wolves who walked these lands before territories and treaties and politics. My bloodline carries gifts that died out in most families centuries ago, including the ability to recognize a true mate even when fate tries to give her to someone else first. Celine's heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. You're saying Marcus wasn't my real mate. I'm saying Marcus Thorne is a fool who threw away something precious because he couldn't see past pack politics and Omega stigma. Valor's hand lifted, hovering near her face but not quite touching. I'm also saying that what you felt in that forest wasn't a mistake or a delusion brought on by blood loss. It was real. The bond between us is real. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time since she'd woken up, Celine saw something other than confidence in his expression. She saw uncertainty, vulnerability, hope. But I'm also saying that I won't force this on you, Valor continued quietly. You've been rejected once, discarded like you meant nothing. I won't add to that pain by demanding you accept a bond you didn't choose. He stood, putting distance between them again. Stay in the Frost Palace as long as you need to recover. You'll have your own rooms, your own space. No one will pressure you or make demands. When you're strong enough to leave, I'll have my people escort you wherever you want to go, with enough supplies to start over somewhere safe. And if I want to stay? The question was out before Celine could stop it. Valor went very still. Then we'll take it slow. No ceremonies, no public declarations, just two people getting to know each other, learning if what fate says is real can actually work in practice. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, Celine Vera, I'm glad you didn't walk past me in that forest. Not because you saved my life, though I'm grateful for that, but because I've been ruling this empire for 15 years, and in all that time I've never met anyone who looked at a dying stranger and chose compassion over survival. The door closed softly behind him. Celine sat in the massive bed, surrounded by luxury she'd never imagined, and tried to process everything that had just happened. A king, a true mate, a second chance she didn't know she wanted and definitely didn't trust. Her wolf was practically purring inside her chest, content and smug, and absolutely certain this was right. Celine wasn't sure about anything anymore, except that her life had just gotten infinitely more complicated. The next 3 days passed in a blur of sleeping, eating, and trying not to panic every time a servant appeared with another tray of food or offer to help her bathe. Celine had never been waited on in her life. In the Blood Moon Pack, Omegas did the serving. They cooked and cleaned and made themselves useful enough that the Alphas and Betas tolerated their existence. The idea of someone bringing her meals and drawing her baths and asking if she needed anything was so alien she wanted to laugh or cry. She wasn't sure which. On the fourth morning, she woke feeling almost normal. The bone-deep exhaustion from draining her Lifeweaver gift had finally faded. Her body no longer felt like it was made of wet sand and broken promises. Time to face whatever came next. Celine dressed in the clothes someone had left folded on the chair. Simple, but well made. Soft leather pants, a wool tunic in deep blue, boots that actually fit. No one had asked her size, that they'd just known. Because Valor had told them. Because he'd been paying attention. That thought should have been creepy. Instead, it made something warm unfurl in her chest. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You don't know this man. You don't know if you can trust him. Just because he's handsome and powerful and apparently your fated mate doesn't mean this is going to work." Her wolf huffed in disagreement. Celine ignored her and stepped into the hallway. The Frost Palace was even more impressive than her room suggested. Corridors of dark stone and crystal stretched in every direction. Windows looked out over snow-covered mountains that seemed to touch the sky. Everywhere she looked there were wolves, servants moving with quiet efficiency, guards standing at attention, nobles in fine clothes discussing things she couldn't quite hear. All of them stopped when they saw her. Celine kept her head up and her spine straight, refusing to shrink under their stares. She'd spent 3 months being invisible, being nothing. She was done with that. A young woman approached, her smile genuine. "You must be Celine. His Majesty said you'd be up and about soon. I'm Nara, head of the household staff." "Nice to meet you," Celine said carefully. Nara gestured down the corridor. "The king asked that you join him for breakfast when you were ready. If you're not comfortable with that, I can have a meal brought to your rooms." "No." Celine squared her shoulders. "I'll join him." She followed Nara through a maze of hallways that all looked the same until they reached a set of double doors. The guards opened them without a word. The room beyond was smaller than Celine expected. Not a grand hall, but a private dining chamber with a table that could seat maybe 10 people. Windows lined one wall, offering a view of the mountains that took her breath away. Valor sat at the head of the table, reading something on a piece of parchment. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was so genuine it made her chest ache. "You're looking better," he said, setting the parchment aside. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a herd of elk, and then put back together wrong," Celine said honestly. "But better than yesterday." Valor's smile widened. "Sit, eat, and tell me if there's anything you need that you haven't been given." Celine sat in the chair Nara pulled out for her, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the spread of food on the table. Fresh bread. Fruit that must have cost a fortune this far north in winter. Smoked fish and cheese and things she didn't even have names for. "This is too much," she said quietly. "It's breakfast," Valor countered. "And you've spent 3 months barely eating. Humor me." They ate in silence for a few minutes. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt comfortable, natural. Like they'd done this 100 times before. "I have a son," Valor said suddenly. "He's 7. His name is Lucien." Celine looked up sharply. Valor met her eyes, his expression serious. "His mother died in childbirth. There have been women since, but none that I've brought into his life. None that mattered enough to introduce him to. If you stay, even just to recover, he'll want to meet you, and I need to know if that's something you can handle." The vulnerability in his voice made something crack in Celine's chest. He wasn't just asking if she could tolerate a child. He was asking if she could accept that he came with responsibilities, with a past, with a life that had nothing to do with mate bonds or fate. "I like children," Celine said softly. "I worked with the Pack's young ones before everything. If Lucien wants to meet me, I'd be honored." The relief on Valor's face was palpable. A door burst open. A small boy with dark hair and his father's golden eyes raced into the room, skidding to a stop when he saw Celine. "Is this her?" Lucien demanded, looking at Valor. "Is this the healer who saved you?" Valor's expression softened in a way that made Celine's heart hurt. "This is Celine. And yes, she's the one who pulled me back from the edge." Lucien turned to Celine, studying her with an intensity that was pure Valor. "You used forbidden magic." "It's not forbidden here," Celine said gently. "But it hurt you." Lucien's brow furrowed. "Father said you almost died saving him." "I did." Celine met the boy's eyes steadily. "But I'd do it again. No one deserves to die alone in the snow." Something in Lucien's expression shifted. He moved closer, climbing into the chair beside her without asking permission. "I'm glad you saved him," the boy said seriously. "I don't want a new father." Celine's throat tightened. "You won't have to worry about that." They finished breakfast with Lucien chattering about his lessons and his favorite horse and the new sword his father had promised him when he turned 8. Valor watched them both with an expression Celine couldn't quite read. When Lucien finally ran off to his training session, Valor turned to her. "He likes you." "I like him," Celine admitted. "He's bright, confident, nothing like I was at his age." "You were rejected and discarded," Valor said quietly. Lucien's been raised knowing he's valued. That makes all the difference. Before Celine could respond, the doors opened again. A man strode in, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and scars that spoke of a lifetime of battles. "Your Majesty," the man said, his voice clipped. "We have a problem." Valor's expression went cold. "What kind of problem, Theron?" "The kind that involves rival alphas gathering in the Eastern Territories." The man's eyes flicked to Celine, then back to Valor, and rumors that the Blood Moon Pack is among them. Celine's blood turned to ice. Valor stood slowly, his presence filling the room. "Leave us, Theron. I'll deal with this." The man hesitated, then bowed and left. Valor turned to Celine, his eyes burning with fury that wasn't directed at her. "Did Marcus Thorne know who I was?" His voice was dangerously soft. "When he rejected you, did he know you were meant for me?" Celine shook her head. "No one knew. I didn't even know until the forest." "But now he does," Valor said grimly. "Now he knows the Omega he threw away is sitting in my palace, and if Theron's sources are correct, he's joined forces with the families who want me dead." The world tilted again. "Why would he care?" Celine whispered. "He rejected me. He made it clear I meant nothing." Valor moved around the table, crouching in front of her chair so they were eye level, because men like Marcus Thorne don't care about what they have until someone else wants it, and because making you his rejected mate when you're destined to be a queen makes him look weak. Foolish. His hands covered hers, warm and steady. "This isn't your fault, Celine. None of this is your fault. But I need you to understand that if you stay here, if you accept this bond, you'll be caught in the middle of a war you didn't start." "I've been caught in the middle of things I didn't start my entire life," Celine said, her voice harder than she expected. "At least this time I'd be fighting beside someone who doesn't see me as dead weight." Valor's eyes searched hers. "You're sure?" "No." Celine tightened her grip on his hands. "But I'm tired of running. I'm tired of surviving instead of living. If there's going to be a war anyway, I'd rather face it here than bleed out alone in another forest." Something fierce and possessive flashed through Valor's expression. "Then we face it together." The bond between them pulsed, growing stronger, real, undeniable. And somewhere in the Eastern Territories, Celine knew, Marcus Thorne was learning that the Omega he'd broken was about to become the one thing he could never touch. A queen. The war room smelled like old leather and tension thick enough to choke on. Celine stood at the edge of the massive table, trying to look like she belonged among the scarred warriors and stone-faced advisors studying maps of the Eastern Territories. Every instinct she'd developed over 3 months of keeping her head down and her mouth shut screamed at her to shrink back, to make herself smaller, to disappear into the shadows where Omegas were supposed to exist. But Valor had placed her at his right hand, not behind him, not tucked away in some corner, right beside him where everyone could see, where everyone had to acknowledge her presence, whether they wanted to or not. "The Eastern families are moving faster than we anticipated," Theron said, pointing to a cluster of markers on the map. "House Corvain has called a gathering at their stronghold. 12 alpha families have confirmed attendance, including Blood Moon." Celine's chest tightened. Marcus would be there, her former mate, the man who'd broken her wrists and shattered her world, and walked away like she was nothing more than a mistake he needed to correct. "What's the official reason for the gathering?" Valor's voice was calm, controlled, but Celine could feel the fury radiating off him through the bond that had been growing stronger every day. "Trade negotiations," a woman across the table said. Her name was Kira, one of Valor's generals, silver hair braided tight against her skull, eyes like chips of ice. "But our sources say Corvain has been stockpiling weapons. Silver-laced, same kind used in the assassination attempt. So they're preparing for war," another advisor muttered. "The question is when they'll move." "They won't move until they have something that justifies it," Valor said. His fingers drummed once against the table, the only sign of agitation. "They need a catalyst, something that makes me look weak or corrupt or unfit to rule." His eyes cut to Celine. "Something like publicly claiming a rejected Omega as my mate." The room went silent. Celine felt every gaze shift to her, measuring, judging, calculating what kind of liability she represented. She'd spent her entire life under that weight, being evaluated and found wanting, being categorized as less than, as a weakness that needed to be managed or removed. The old Celine would have apologized, would have offered to leave, would have made herself even smaller to ease the tension. But the old Celine had bled out in the snow 3 months ago. "Then don't claim me publicly," she said, her voice steady. "Keep me hidden. Use me as a healer for your people, but nothing more. Don't give them the ammunition." Valor's head turned sharply toward her. "That's not an option." "Why not?" Celine met his eyes, refusing to look away, even though the intensity there made her want to. "You said you wouldn't force the bond. You said I could leave when I was ready. So let me stay, but keep it quiet. No ceremonies, no announcements, just a healer living in the palace." "Because that's not what you are," Valor said, his voice dropping into that tone that made every wolf in the room stand a little straighter. "You're not a kept secret or a hidden shame. You're my mate, and I don't hide what's mine." The possessiveness in those words should have set her teeth on edge, should have reminded her of Marcus, who treated her like property he could discard when she stopped being useful. But there was a difference. Marcus had owned her like a tool. Valor was claiming her like she mattered, like her presence at his side was a statement he wanted to make regardless of the political cost. "Your Majesty," Theron said carefully, "with all respect, Lady Celine has a point. If we announce the bond now, we hand Corvain exactly what he needs. A rejected Omega becoming queen? The Eastern families will call it an insult to tradition. They'll rally wolves who might otherwise stay neutral. Let them," Valor said flatly. His hand moved to cover Celine's where it rested on the table. "I've spent 15 years playing politics, bending to tradition, making compromises to keep the peace. And what did it get me? Assassins in the forest and rivals who think I'm weak enough to challenge." He stood, and the entire room seemed to shrink around him. "I'm done compromising. Celine Vera saved my life using magic most wolves fear and misunderstand. She survived 3 months alone in territories that kill trained warriors. She's got more spine than half the alphas plotting against me. If the Eastern families want to use her as justification for war, fine. We'll give them a war. And when it's over, they'll kneel before her or they'll bleed." The silence that followed was absolute. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. He was choosing her, publicly, irrevocably, knowing exactly what it would cost him. No one had ever chosen her before. "Your Majesty," Kira said slowly, "if we're moving toward open conflict, we need to prepare. Reinforce the border territories. Call in the allied packs. Start stockpiling supplies." "Do it," Valor said. He looked at Theron. "Send word to House Corvain. Tell them I'll be attending their gathering." The room erupted. "That's exactly what they want," someone protested. "You'll be walking into hostile territory with a target on your back." "Which is why I won't be going alone," Valor said. His eyes found Celine's again. "I'm bringing my mate, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly." The meeting dissolved into planning and arguments and logistics. Celine barely heard any of it. Her mind was stuck on one word: mate. He'd said it in front of his entire council, made it official, real, the point of no return. Celine found herself in the training yard an hour later, needing to move, to breathe, to do something other than stand in rooms full of people who looked at her like a problem that needed solving. The yard was empty except for a few guards running drills at the far end. She picked up a practice sword from the rack, testing its weight. Too heavy, wrong balance. She'd never been much of a fighter. Healers didn't usually need to be, but maybe it was time to change that. "You're holding it wrong." Celine spun. Lucien stood a few feet away, his own practice sword slung over his shoulder. For a 7-year-old, he moved with the kind of confidence that came from growing up knowing he was valued. "Show me," Celine said. Lucien grinned. He moved beside her, adjusting her grip, her stance. Like this. Feet apart, knees bent. Don't lock your elbows or you'll break your arms when someone hits your blade. They went through basic forms. Lucien was a patient teacher, correcting her mistakes without making her feel stupid. It was such a stark contrast to how she'd been trained in the Blood Moon Pack, where mistakes were punished and weakness was grounds for dismissal. "Father says you're going to be queen," Lucien said suddenly, his voice too casual. Celine nearly dropped the sword. "He told you that?" "He tells me everything important." Lucien adjusted his stance, swinging his blade in a smooth arc. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Celine admitted. "Good. Lucian lowered his sword, looking at her with those unsettling golden eyes. Father says only fools aren't scared of things that matter. It's what you do with the fear that counts. Smart man, your father. He's a good king, Lucian said seriously, but he's been alone a long time, since Mother died. He needed someone who sees him as just a man instead of a crown. And you think I do? I think you saved his life when you could have walked away. Lucian shrugged. That's not something you do for a king. That's something you do for a person. Before Celine could respond, Valor's voice cut across the yard. Teaching her to fight, Lucien. Teaching her not to die if someone attacks her, Lucian corrected. There's a difference. Valor's laugh was genuine, warm. It transformed his face from intimidating to something almost approachable. He moved toward them, his presence filling the space without effort. He's right, Valor said to Celine. If you're coming to Corvain's gathering, you need to know how to defend yourself. Silver blades aren't the only weapons the Eastern families use. I'm a healer, not a warrior, Celine said quietly. You're both, Valor countered. He took the practice sword from her hand, setting it aside. And you're also my mate, which means every wolf at that gathering will be looking for weaknesses to exploit. Anything they can use against me. His hand settled on her shoulders, warm and solid. I need you ready, Celine. Not just physically, emotionally. Because when we walk into that hall, Marcus Thorne will be there. And he's going to say things designed to break you, to make you doubt yourself, to remind you of every moment he made you feel worthless. I know, Celine said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Do you? Valor's eyes searched hers. Because the last time you faced him, you were alone, broken, trying to survive rejection. This time, you'll be walking in as my equal, as someone he threw away who became something he can never touch. That's going to enrage him in ways you're not prepared for. Then prepare me, Celine said. Teach me how to stand in a room full of wolves who think I don't belong and not flinch. Something fierce flashed through Valor's expression. He leaned in, close enough that she could feel his breath against her ear. You start by remembering that you survived 3 months in the Northlands alone. You healed a dying king with magic that should have killed you. You looked at my son and saw a child instead of a political tool. You've already proven you belong here, Celine. The only one who needs convincing is you. He pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders. The gathering is in 5 days. We'll spend that time getting you ready, teaching you how to move in noble circles, how to deflect insults without showing weakness, how to make Marcus Thorne regret every moment he ever made you feel small. And if I can't, Celine whispered, if I freeze or break or prove him right, then I'll burn his entire territory to ash and salt the earth behind me, Valor said simply. But you won't break. Because you're not the same Omega he rejected. You're the woman who pulled a king back from death. And that woman doesn't break easily. Aman. The next 5 days were brutal. Kira taught Celine how to fight dirty. Not formal combat, but street tactics. Where to hit to cause maximum pain, how to break a hold, where to carry a blade so it was accessible but hidden. Nara taught her court politics, who hated who, which families owed allegiance to Valor and which were waiting for an excuse to betray him, how to read a room and identify threats before they materialized. Valor taught her how to use the bond. They'd sit in his study, the door locked, and he'd push emotions through the connection between them. Confidence, strength, the kind of absolute certainty that came from years of ruling. At first, it was overwhelming, like trying to hold an ocean in a teacup, but gradually Celine learned to accept it without drowning, to let his strength reinforce hers without losing herself in the process. You're a quick study, Valor said on the 4th night. They were sitting by the fire, close enough that their shoulders touched. Most wolves take months to learn bond manipulation. You've picked it up in days. Maybe I'm motivated, Celine said, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, absorbing the warmth. Or maybe you're stronger than you think, Valor countered. He was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. I meant what I said in the war room, about not hiding you, but if you want to back out, if this is too much too fast, I'll understand. Celine set down her mug, turning to face him fully. 3 months ago, I would have taken that out. I would have run, found some quiet territory where no one knew my name or my history, Live the rest of my life as a wandering healer. And now? Now I'm tired of running. Celine's voice hardened. Marcus Thorne rejected me because I wasn't good enough. Because Omega blood made me worthless in his eyes. I want to walk into that gathering on your arm and watch him realize he threw away something he'll never get back. The smile that crossed Valor's face was predatory. That's my girl. The possessiveness in those words settled into Celine's chest like a brand. Not painful, just permanent. She was his, and he was hers. The bond pulsed between them, stronger than ever. The morning they left for House Corvain's territory, Celine dressed in clothes that felt like armor. Dark leather pants fitted close. A tunic in deep blue, the color of Valor's house, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light. A cloak lined with fur that was probably worth more than everything she'd owned in her entire life combined. Nara had braided her hair back from her face, weaving in small crystals that sparkled like ice. "You look like a queen," the woman said softly. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Celine countered, staring at herself in the mirror. "No?" Nara met her eyes in the reflection. "You look like someone who belongs at a king's side. Own it. Easier said than done." But when Celine walked into the courtyard and saw Valor waiting beside the horses, the look on his face made something warm unfurl in her chest. He was staring at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Beautiful," he said simply. Then he held out his hand. "Ready?" "No," Celine admitted. "But let's go anyway." The journey to House Corvain took 2 days. They traveled with a full escort, 20 warriors, all handpicked by Kira, enough to make a statement without looking afraid. Celine rode beside Valor, hyper-aware of every wolf they passed. The way people stared. The whispers that followed them like smoke. The rejected Omega. The king's new mate. The healer who used forbidden magic. She kept her head up and her expression neutral, the way Nara had taught her. Didn't react to the stares or the whispers or the occasional hostile glare from wolves who clearly thought she didn't belong. "You're doing well," Valor murmured as they made camp the first night. "Most wolves would have cracked by now." "Most wolves haven't spent 3 months being invisible," Celine said. "This is just a different kind of survival." That night, lying in her tent with the sounds of the camp around her, Celine felt the first real tendril of doubt creep in. What was she doing? She was an Omega, a healer, someone who'd spent her entire life on the margins, making herself useful enough to be tolerated but never valued. And now she was riding toward a gathering of the most powerful alphas in the Northlands, wearing a king's colors, preparing to stand in front of the man who'd rejected her and act like she belonged. The tent flap opened. Valor ducked inside, his presence filling the small space. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much thinking," Celine admitted. Valor settled beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Talk to me." "What if they're right?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "What if I'm not strong enough for this? What if Marcus looks at me tomorrow and I remember every reason he was right to reject me?" Valor's hand found hers in the darkness. "Then you remember every reason I chose you, every moment you proved you're more than what he saw." He shifted, and suddenly his eyes were locked on hers, glowing faintly gold in the dim light. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Celine? I see a woman who saved a stranger's life knowing it might kill her, who survived rejection and kept walking, who looked at my son and saw a child worth protecting instead of a political advantage. I see someone who's been broken and put herself back together stronger than before." His hand moved to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Marcus Thorne is a fool, and tomorrow, when you walk into that hall wearing my mark, carrying my scent, standing at my side, he's going to realize exactly how badly he miscalculated. And there's nothing he can do about it." "What if he tries?" Celine whispered. "What if he demands I come back? Claims some kind of prior right?" "Then I'll kill him," Valor said simply, in front of everyone, and dare anyone to call it murder instead of justice. The certainty in his voice should have been frightening. Instead, it was grounding, real. This man would go to war for her, would burn down territories, would rewrite laws, all because she'd chosen not to let him die in the snow. "Sleep," Valor said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Tomorrow, we show them what a real queen looks like." House Corvain's stronghold rose from the mountains like a fortress carved from ice and stone. Towers that pierced the sky, walls thick enough to withstand a siege, gates that looked like they could stop an army or trap one inside. Celine's hands tightened on her reins as they approached. The courtyard was already crowded with wolves from a dozen different packs. She could feel their eyes tracking their approach, calculating, judging, looking for weaknesses. Valor dismounted first, then turned to help her down. His hands settled on her waist, lowering her to the ground with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Stay close," he murmured. "Don't let them separate us." Celine nodded, her throat too tight for words. They walked toward the main hall, Valor's hand resting on the small of her back. A claiming touch, visible to everyone watching. The hall was massive, vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow, banners from every major house hanging from the rafters, tables arranged in a massive horseshoe with House Corvain's patriarch seated at the center, and there, 3 tables down, wearing blood moon colors and a smile that made Celine's stomach turn. Marcus Thorne. He looked exactly the same, tall, handsome in that polished way alphas often were, eyes that had once made her heart race and now just made her skin crawl. Those eyes locked on her and something ugly flickered across his face. Recognition, disbelief, rage. Celine forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away, to stand beside Valor like she had every right to be there. Because she did. The hall quieted as they entered, every conversation dying, every eye turning toward them. "King Valor," Lord Corvain called out, rising from his seat. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Welcome to my hall, and your companion?" Valor's hand tightened on Celine's back. "This is Celine Vera, my mate, future queen of the Northern Empire." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marcus stood, his chair scraping loudly against stone. "Your mate?" His voice cut through the quiet like a blade. "That's Blood Moon Pact property you're claiming, Your Majesty. Property I already rejected." Celine felt the bond flare, Valor's rage flooding through the connection, but his voice remained calm when he spoke. "Rejected property can't be claimed, Thorne. You made your choice. I'm making mine." "She's Omega trash," Marcus snarled, and Celine saw the exact moment he realized he'd gone too far. "You'd make that creature a queen? Insult every alpha bloodline in the Northlands?" Valor moved. One moment he was standing beside Celine. The next, he had Marcus by the throat, slammed against the nearest pillar hard enough to crack stone. "The only insult here is you," Valor said, his voice dropping into something that made every wolf in the hall freeze. "You had a true mate, a gifted healer, a woman worth more than your entire pack combined, and you threw her away because you're too weak and stupid to recognize value when it's standing in front of you." His hand tightened, cutting off whatever response Marcus tried to make. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Celine. You're going to acknowledge that rejecting her was the worst mistake of your pathetic life. And then you're going to sit down, shut up, and pray I don't decide your existence is more trouble than it's worth." He released Marcus, who collapsed to the ground, gasping. The hall was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. Celine stood in the center of it all, her heart hammering, her hands steady. And when Marcus finally looked up at her, wheezing and humiliated, she smiled. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. The smile of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt into something harder. "Apology accepted," she said sweetly. "Now get out of my sight before my mate changes his mind about letting you live." Marcus scrambled away. And Celine realized, standing in that hall full of hostile wolves, wearing a king's colors, watching her former mate retreat in shame, that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for. Not acceptance, not validation. Power. The kind that came from surviving what should have killed her and choosing to stand anyway. Valor's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. The bond between them blazed like fire, and somewhere in the back of the hall, a wolf began to clap. Then another, until half the alphas in the room were on their feet, acknowledging what Marcus had been too blind to see. That Celine Vera, rejected Omega and wandering healer, was going to be a queen, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do to stop it. The applause died slowly, like embers burning down to ash. Celine stood in the center of House Corvain's great hall, her hands still locked in Valor's, and felt the weight of every stare pressing against her skin. The wolves who'd clapped weren't celebrating her. They were acknowledging a shift in power, calculating what it meant for their own territories, their own survival. Politics wrapped in the illusion of respect. Lord Corvain rose from his seat at the center table, his expression carefully neutral. An impressive display, Your Majesty. Though perhaps we could continue this gathering with less violence. We came here to discuss trade, not settle personal grievances. There's nothing personal about defending my mate's honor, Valor said. His voice carried across the hall, calm but edged with something dangerous. But you're right, we have business to discuss. He guided Celine toward the high table, his hand never leaving her back. She could feel the tension radiating through him, the barely controlled fury that Marcus's words had ignited. But his face remained impassive, regal, every inch the king these wolves needed him to be. They took their seats. Celine found herself positioned between Valor and an older alpha woman wearing House Blackwater colors. The woman studied her with shrewd eyes, then leaned close enough that only Celine could hear. You've got spine, girl. More than most Omegas I've met. Let's see if you've got the stomach to match. Before Celine could respond, servants began bringing out food. Roasted meat, fresh bread, wine that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. The gathering settled into the rhythm of a formal meal, conversations rising and falling around her like waves. But Celine could feel the undercurrents, the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she looked too close. Something was wrong. The air tasted like anticipation and poorly hidden malice. Valor felt it too. His posture was relaxed, but Celine could sense the coiled readiness in his muscles through the bond. A predator pretending to be at ease while scanning for threats. Tell me, Lord Corvain said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. This gathering was called to discuss the northern trade routes. Specifically, the tariffs House Drakkar has been imposing on eastern merchants. Standard tariffs, Valor said. Same rates every territory pays. But not every territory controls the mountain passes, another alpha interjected. A thin man with Ashford colors. You've got a monopoly on the fastest routes to the coast. Some might call that an abuse of power. Some might call it geography, Valor countered. I didn't create the mountains. I just happen to rule the territory they're in. The conversation devolved into economics and trade law. Celine tried to follow, but the technical details blurred together. She found herself studying the faces around the table instead. Looking for tells, for the kind of micro-expressions Nara had taught her to recognize. Most of the alphas looked bored. A few looked hostile, but that was expected. Marcus sat 3 tables down, nursing what looked like a broken jaw and a shattered ego, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. But there was one man who didn't fit the pattern. Sitting 2 seats down from Lord Corvain, younger than most of the alphas present, maybe 30. Dark hair, pale eyes, an easy smile that never quite reached his face. He wasn't watching Valor. He was watching Lucien's empty seat at the high table. Celine's stomach dropped. Lucien. They'd left him at the Frost Palace with a full guard detail. Safe, protected. But the way this man was staring at that empty chair made something cold slither down her spine. She touched Valor's arm, leaning close. Who's the Alpha 2 seats from Corvain? The one who keeps looking at where Lucien should be sitting? Valor's eyes flicked over, then back. Rendered Vex. House Silverclaw. One of my father's old allies. Why? Something's wrong, Celine whispered. The way he's looking at that chair, like he's waiting for something. Valor went very still. Then he stood, his chair scraping loudly. The hall quieted. My apologies, Lord Corvain. I need to step out briefly. Continue without me. Before anyone could protest, he was moving toward the exit. Celine followed, her heart hammering. They made it to the corridor outside before Valor turned to Theron, who'd been standing guard. Send word to the palace. Now. I want confirmation that Lucien is safe. Theron nodded and disappeared down the hallway at a run. Valor leaned against the stone wall, his jaw clenched so tight Celine could see the muscle jumping. Talk to me. What did you see? I don't know, Celine said. Just a feeling. The way he was staring, like he was anticipating something. Your instincts kept you alive for 3 months, Valor said. I'm not going to ignore them now. They waited in tense silence. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, Theron reappeared, his face pale. The messenger birds aren't responding, Your Majesty. None of them. Valor's expression went cold. How many did you send? 6. Different routes, different birds. Protocol says at least one should have answered by now. Which means someone's intercepting them, Valor said quietly. He looked at Celine, and she saw the fear he was trying to hide. They're going after Lucian. The words hit like a physical blow. Celine's mind raced. If someone was targeting the prince, they'd need inside help. People who knew the guard rotations, the palace layout, people Valor trusted. The kind of people who could walk right past security without raising alarms. We need to go back, Celine said. Now. If we leave, it looks like we're running, Theron warned. Every alpha in that hall will see it as weakness. If we stay and something happens to my son, I'll burn this entire stronghold to the ground with everyone inside, Valor snarled. His eyes blazed gold, his wolf rising to the surface. Gather our people. We leave in 10 minutes. Theron disappeared again. Valor turned to Celine, his hands framing her face. I need you to stay here, safe, behind walls and guards. If this is a trap designed to draw me out, I can't risk them taking you too. No, Celine said. The word came out harder than she intended. You're not leaving me here alone in a hall full of wolves who want you dead. Celine, I'm your mate, she interrupted, your future queen, which means Lucien is going to be my son, and I'm not sitting in a safe room while he's in danger. Something flickered in Valor's eyes. Pride mixed with fear, mixed with something that looked like love. You're sure? I survived 3 months alone in the Northlands, Celine said. I can survive a ride back to the palace. Valor's kiss was hard and fast and tasted like desperation. Then we ride. What? They left House Corvain's stronghold like a storm gathering momentum. 20 warriors, 2 wolves who'd refused to be separated, and the growing certainty that they were riding into something worse than an assassination attempt. This was coordinated, planned. The kind of operation that took months to organize, the kind that required someone inside Valor's inner circle. They pushed the horses hard, racing through mountain passes as the sun began to set. Celine had never ridden this fast, this recklessly. Her thighs screamed in protest, but she ignored them, leaning low over her mount's neck, keeping pace with Valor. The bond between them was stretched taut, vibrating with his fear for Lucien and fury at whoever had orchestrated this. How far? Celine called over the thunder of hooves. 6 hours at this pace, Valor shouted back. Maybe 5 if we don't stop. They didn't stop. Night fell. The temperature dropped. Celine's hands went numb on the reins, but she didn't slow down. Couldn't. Not when a 7-year-old boy was in danger because of her. Because Valor had claimed her publicly, and someone had decided that made Lucien a target. We should have seen this coming, Kira said, riding up beside them. Her face was grim. Should have anticipated they'd go after the prince. How? Valor demanded. I had triple guards on him. The best warriors in the Empire. People I've trusted for years. That's the problem, isn't it? Kira's voice was bitter. You trusted them. The implications hung in the air like poison. Someone inside had betrayed him. Someone close enough to know the guard rotations. The palace layout. Lucien's routine. Someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to strike. They crested a ridge and the Frost Palace came into view below. Even from a distance, Celine could see something was wrong. Smoke rising from the east wing, lights blazing in patterns that didn't match normal operation, and no guards visible on the outer walls. It's already started, Theron said quietly. Valor didn't respond. He just kicked his horse faster, racing down the mountain toward his home, toward his son. They hit the outer gates at full speed. The courtyard was chaos, bodies on the ground, blood on the snow, the acrid smell of silver and smoke choking the air. But no enemy forces visible. Whoever had done this was already inside. Valor was off his horse before it fully stopped, shifting mid-leap into his massive black wolf form. He hit the ground running, barreling toward the main entrance. Celine slid down, her legs nearly buckling. Kira caught her arm. Stay with me, the general ordered. Don't go running off alone. They moved through the palace like ghosts through a graveyard. Every corridor they passed showed signs of battle. Claw marks on the walls, shattered furniture. More bodies than Celine wanted to count. all of them wearing Valor's colors, all of them people who'd been betrayed by someone they trusted. They found the first survivors huddled in a storage room, 3 servants and a young guard, all wounded but alive. "What happened?" Kira demanded. The guard's hand shook as he tried to speak. "They came from inside. The new captain. He turned on us during the shift change, opened the gates for outside forces." "New captain?" Kira's face went white. Rendered Vex took over security detail 2 weeks ago. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Rendered Vex, the man who'd been staring at Lucian's empty chair, the man who'd somehow convinced Valor to put him in charge of palace security, the man who'd been waiting for Valor to leave so he could strike. "Where's the prince?" Celine asked, her voice hoarse. The guard's eyes filled with tears. Captain Vex took him to the throne room, said he had orders to hold him until the king returned. Valor's roar shook the palace walls. Celine ran toward the sound, Kira cursing behind her. They burst into the throne room to find Valor in human form again, standing 20 feet from his throne, where Rendered Vex sat with a silver blade pressed to Lucian's throat. The boy was conscious, his eyes wide with terror but his jaw set in stubborn defiance. That was pure Valor. There was blood on his temple, bruises forming on his arms where someone had grabbed him too hard. But he was alive. "Father," Lucian said, his voice remarkably steady for a 7-year-old with a knife at his throat. "He says if you move, he'll kill me." Valor's hands were clenched at his sides, his entire body vibrating with the effort to stay still. "Let him go, Vex. Whatever you want, whatever they're paying you, I'll double it." Rendered Vex smiled. It was a cold, calculated expression that made Celine's skin crawl. "This isn't about money, Your Majesty. This is about sending a message." He pressed the blade harder. Lucian flinched but didn't cry out. "The Eastern families are tired of your rule, tired of your progressive policies, tired of watching you elevate omegas and weaklings while real alphas are pushed aside. So we decided it was time for a change." "We," Valor repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Who else is part of this?" Vex's smile widened. "More than you think. People you've trusted for years. People in your council, your guard, your inner circle. We've been planning this for months, waiting for you to make a mistake." His eyes cut to Celine. "And then you gave us the perfect opening, claiming a rejected Omega as your mate? Bringing her to a gathering of alphas? You might as well have painted a target on your back and begged us to shoot." "So this is about me," Celine said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "You're using a child to punish his father for choosing me." "I'm using a child to prove a point," Vex corrected, "that King Valor Dracar is weak, sentimental, unfit to rule, the kind of man who'd risk everything for a woman who means nothing." Celine felt the bond flare, Valor's rage threatening to consume him. "She means everything," Valor said, "and if you hurt my son, there won't be a corner of this world dark enough to hide you." "Bold words from a man with no leverage," Vex said. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to renounce your claim on the Omega, publicly, in front of witnesses. You're going to acknowledge that elevating her was a mistake born of poor judgment. And if I refuse, then I kill the prince." Vex's blade drew a thin line of blood on Lucian's throat. The boy gasped, but still didn't cry. "And you get to explain to the Empire why your pride was worth more than your son's life." The silence that followed was absolute. Celine's mind raced. This wasn't just about her. This was a coup. A power play designed to break Valor publicly, to prove he could be manipulated, to destroy his authority in front of his own people. If he renounced her, he'd look weak, controllable. Every alpha in the Empire would see it as proof he could be pressured. If he refused, Lucian died. There was no good choice, unless she made one for him. Celine stepped forward. Kira tried to grab her arm, but she shook her off, moving into the center of the throne room where both men could see her clearly. "You want me gone?" she said, looking at Vex. "Fine. I'll leave. I'll renounce the bond myself, walk away and never come back. Just let the boy go." "Celine." "No," Valor started. She cut him off with a look. "It's not worth a child's life. Nothing is." Vex studied her, his expression calculating. How noble. The Omega sacrificing herself to save the prince. "Almost makes me believe you actually care." He stood, dragging Lucian with him. "But here's the problem. Even if you leave, you're still a loose end, still someone who could come back, Still someone the king might chase after like a lovesick fool. His smile turned vicious. So I'm afraid we're going to need something more permanent than a simple goodbye. He shifted his grip on the blade, angling it toward Celine instead of Lucien. You want to save the prince? Prove it. Come here and let me kill you. Right here, right now, in front of the king and everyone watching. Show us all that an Omega knows her place. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Valor moved, but Vex's blade was back at Lucian's throat before he'd taken 2 steps. One more move and the boy dies screaming, Vex snarled. Your choice, your majesty. The Omega's life or your son's? Pick one. Time seemed to slow down. Celine could see it all playing out. The impossible choice. The no-win scenario designed to break Violor no matter what he decided. If he let her die, he'd lose his mate and carry that guilt forever. If he saved her, Lucien died, and the Empire would never forgive him. Vex had backed them into a corner so tight there was no room to breathe, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Celine was just an Omega, just a healer, just someone who would freeze or break when faced with real violence. He didn't know she'd survived 3 months in the Northlands by learning when to fight and when to use the weapons no one expected. Celine met Valor's eyes across the throne room. She let everything she felt pour through the bond. Love, gratitude, absolute certainty. Then she reached for the Life-Weaver magic coiled in her core. The power that had saved Violor in the forest. The magic that could pull someone back from death by sacrificing the healer's own life force. The gift that worked both ways. If she could give life, she could take it too. I'll do it, Celine said, her voice calm. I'll come to you. Just let me say goodbye first. She moved toward Valor, slow and deliberate. Vex watched her like a hawk tracking prey, but he didn't stop her. Celine stopped in front of Valor, close enough to feel his heat, close enough to see the anguish in his eyes. Don't, he whispered. Please don't do this. Take care of Lucien, she whispered back. And then she turned toward Vex. Each step felt like walking through deep water, heavy, inevitable. Vex's smile was triumphant. He thought he'd won, thought he'd broken them both. Celine stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that when she lunged, he wouldn't have time to react. I'm ready, she said. Vex raised the blade, and Celine unleashed every ounce of Life-Weaver power she'd been gathering, channeling it not into healing, but into destruction. The magic hit Vex like a physical blow. His body seized, the blade clattering from his hand as he collapsed. Celine caught Lucien as he fell, pulling the boy behind her as Vex writhed on the floor. Life-Weaver magic worked by manipulating the body's natural processes, accelerating healing, forcing wounds to close, or accelerating decay, forcing organs to fail. Celine had never used it this way before, never even knew she could. But watching Vex convulse, his body eating itself from the inside out, she felt no guilt, just cold, hard satisfaction. Valor was there in an instant, checking Lucien for injuries. The boy was shaking but alive, his arms wrapped around his father's neck. Kira moved to Vex's body, checking for a pulse. Dead, she confirmed. Then her eyes found Celine. What did you do? What I had to, Celine said. Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. What any queen would do to protect her family. Around them, more guards were flooding into the throne room, some wearing Valor's colors, some wearing Eastern family crests. The ones in enemy colors stopped dead when they saw Vex's body. Then they dropped their weapons. The coup was over before it had really begun. But as Celine stood there, surrounded by corpses and broken trust, and the smoking ruins of everything Valor had built, she realized something fundamental had changed. She'd killed a man. Used her gift, the power meant to save lives, to end one, and she'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant protecting the people she loved. That knowledge settled into her bones like a brand. She wasn't the Omega who'd been rejected 3 months ago. She wasn't even the healer who'd saved a dying king. She was something new, something harder, something the world would learn to fear. Valor stood, still holding Lucien, and looked at her with eyes that held awe and concern in equal measure. Are you all right? He asked quietly. No, Celine said honestly, but I will be. She looked at the assembled guards, the survivors, the witnesses who would carry this story to every corner of the Empire. Rendred Vex tried to kill the prince, she said, her voice carrying across the throne room. He threatened King Valor. attempted a coup supported by Eastern family traitors, and he died for it. Her eyes swept the crowd, daring anyone to challenge her. Let this be a lesson. Anyone who threatens this family, this kingdom, will face the same fate. I don't care what your bloodline is. I don't care how powerful you think you are. You come for what's mine, and I'll burn you down from the inside out. The silence that followed was absolute. Then one of Valor's guards dropped to one knee, then another, until half the room was kneeling before her. Not because she was an Omega, because she was the woman who'd just killed a traitor with nothing but her will and her gift. Because she was the healer who'd become a weapon. Because she was going to be a queen unlike any the Northlands had ever seen. Valor moved to her side, Lucien still in his arms. The three of them stood together in the center of the throne room, surrounded by loyalty and corpses and the ashes of betrayal. A family forged in blood and magic and choices no one should have had to make. But they'd survived, and everyone who doubted them now knew exactly what that survival had cost. The throne room reeked of death and burned ambition. Celine stood in the center of the carnage, her hands still trembling from the magic she'd unleashed, and tried to process what she'd just done. Around her, warriors knelt in submission, corpses cooled on blood-slicked stone, and somewhere in the corridors beyond, more traitors were realizing their coup had failed before it truly began. She'd killed a man, not in self-defense, not by accident. She'd looked rendered Vex in the eyes and made a conscious choice to stop his heart using the same gift that was supposed to preserve life. The old Celine would have been horrified, would have broken down, would have questioned everything she thought she knew about herself. But the old Celine had died in the snow 3 months ago alongside her illusions about fate and fairness, and the world being anything other than brutal. This Celine understood something the healers who'd trained her had been too afraid to admit. Power was power. It didn't care about intention or morality or the pretty lies people told themselves about good and evil. It just was. A tool that could save or destroy depending on who wielded it and why. And she'd just proven she could wield it like a weapon when the people she loved were threatened. That knowledge settled into her bones like frozen iron. Heavy. Permanent. Changing the fundamental architecture of who she was. Valor's hand found her shoulder, warm and grounding. The bond between them pulsed with concern and something that felt like pride. "Take Lucien to the healer's wing," he said quietly to Kira. "Make sure he's examined, every scratch catalogued." The general nodded, gently extracting the boy from his father's arms. Lucien clung for a moment, then let go with the kind of trust that only children possessed, the kind that believed adults would fix everything if given enough time. Celine hoped he was right. As Kira carried the prince away, Valor turned to address the assembled wolves. His voice carried across the throne room, commanding attention without effort. "Tonight, traitors attempted to destroy everything we've built. They murdered loyal guards, threatened my son, and believed they could force my hand through terror and violence." His eyes swept the crowd, gold and burning. They were wrong. He moved toward the throne, each step deliberate. When he reached it, he didn't sit. He stood beside it, one hand resting on the ancient stone. Rendered Vex is dead. But he didn't act alone. The Eastern families who supported him, who sent warriors to infiltrate my palace, who believed a rejected Omega would be my weakness, are about to learn the cost of treason. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Send riders to every territory," Valor continued. "Every pack, every family. I want a full accounting of who knew about this coup and when. Anyone who provided aid, supplies, or intelligence to the conspirators has 3 days to surrender themselves for judgment. After that, I consider their entire house complicit." "Your Majesty," one of the kneeling warriors said hesitantly, "some of the families involved control critical territories. If we move against them all at once, then we move against them all at once," Valor said flatly. "I'm done playing politics with wolves who mistake patience for weakness. This empire has one king. Me. And anyone who can't accept that can leave or die. I don't particularly care which." The room went silent. Celine watched him command the space, watched seasoned warriors twice his age defer to his authority without question, and understood something crucial. This wasn't just anger speaking. This was a king who'd been holding back for years, making compromises to avoid bloodshed, trying to rule with wisdom instead of fear. and his enemies had mistaken that restraint for something they could exploit. They'd forgotten that wise kings could also be terrifying when pushed too far. "You have your orders," Valor said. "Execute them." The warriors dispersed, moving with the efficiency of people who knew better than to hesitate when their king spoke in that tone. Within minutes, the throne room was empty except for Celine and Valor and the bodies no one had gotten around to removing yet. Valor turned to her, and for the first time since the fighting started, she saw the cracks in his armor, the fear he'd been suppressing, the rage still burning just beneath the surface. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her, checking for injuries with a thoroughness that would have been embarrassing if she had the energy to care. "I'm fine," Celine said. "Physically, anyway." "And mentally?" She met his eyes. "I killed a man tonight. Used magic meant for healing to stop someone's heart. I'm not sure fine is the right word for what I am." Valor's hands stilled on her shoulders. "Do you regret it?" Celine thought about Lucien's terrified face, about the blade at his throat, about every moment of that impossible choice Vex had forced on them. "No," she said quietly. "I'd do it again. But that doesn't mean it doesn't change things." "It does change things," Valor agreed, his forehead pressed against hers close enough that she could feel his breath. "You were a healer who saved lives. Now you're a weapon who can end them. That's not a small shift." "Is that what you need?" Celine asked. "A weapon? I need a partner," Valor said. "Someone strong enough to stand beside me when wolves like Vex decide they can take what's mine. Someone who won't break when the choices get ugly." His hands moved to cup her face, tilting her head back so their eyes locked. "You proved tonight you're that person, and it terrifies me because I know what it cost you, what it will keep costing if you stay." "Then we're even," Celine said. "Because you terrify me too. The way you're willing to go to war over me. The way you look at our enemies like they're already dead. The way you make me want to be someone worth that kind of loyalty." The bond between them flared, burning away the space where doubt lived. Valor kissed her, hard, desperate, like he was trying to convince himself she was real and alive and still here despite everything that had just happened. Celine kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring 3 months of loneliness and rejection and hard-won survival into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Valor's expression had shifted into something calculating. "We need to move fast," he said, "before the Eastern families have time to regroup, before they realize how badly Vex's death just fractured their alliance." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we don't wait for them to attack again." Valor's smile was cold and sharp. "We take the fight to them. Hit House Corvain first. Make an example that every other conspiring family will see and understand." "That's war," Celine said. "War was always coming," Valor countered. "Tonight just moved up the timeline. The question is whether you're ready for what that means." Celine looked around the throne room, at the blood, the bodies, the physical evidence of what happened when people underestimated her. "I spent 3 months learning to survive," she said quietly. "I think it's time I learned to win." Bam! The War Council convened at dawn in a strategy room that smelled like old maps and newer violence. Celine sat at Valor's right hand, ignoring the stares from generals and advisors who still weren't sure what to make of her. 24 hours ago, she'd been a rejected Omega playing at Queen. Now she was the woman who'd killed a traitor, with nothing but her will and her gift. The shift in how people looked at her was palpable. Kira spread maps across the table, marking territories in different colors. Red for confirmed traitors, yellow for suspected sympathizers, blue for loyal houses. There was a lot more red and yellow than blue. "House Corvain's stronghold sits here," Kira said, tapping a mountain range on the eastern border. "Natural fortifications. 3 approach routes, all easily defended. They've been stockpiling supplies for months. If we lay siege, they could hold out indefinitely." "Then we don't lay siege," Valor said. "We go in fast. Hit them before they're fully mobilized." "With what forces?" Theron asked. "We lost 20 warriors last night. Another 30 are wounded. Even pulling from allied territories, we're looking at maybe 200 fighters against fortifications designed to hold off armies." 200 wolves is an army," Valor said, "if they're the right wolves." He looked at Celine. "How many wounded can you heal?" Honestly, Celine considered. In the aftermath of the coup attempt, she'd spent hours in the healer's wing, mending everything from minor cuts to life-threatening injuries. Her Lifeweaver gift made her faster and more effective than normal healers, but it still drained her. "Maybe 50 before I collapse," she said. "More if they're minor injuries. Less if they're severe." "Can you teach others?" Valor asked. "Even basic techniques. Anything that gets warriors back on their feet faster." "I can try," Celine said. "Most healers can't access Lifeweaver magic, but I can show them efficiency tricks. Ways to conserve energy. Prioritize treatments." "Do it," Valor ordered. "We need every fighter we can field." The meeting devolved into logistics, supply lines, march routes, how to move an army through mountain passes without alerting every spy network between here and House Corvain's gates. Celine listened, absorbing the brutal calculus of warfare. How many lives one strategic position was worth, which territories they could afford to leave undefended, where to position healers for maximum efficiency when the wounded started flooding in. This was the reality of being queen, not ceremonies and pretty dresses and political niceties. This, planning how to kill people efficiently while minimizing your own losses. The meeting broke up near midday. Warriors dispersed to their assigned tasks. Celine found herself alone with Valor in the strategy room, staring at maps that reduced living wolves to colored markers. "Second thoughts?" Valor asked quietly. "Constantly," Celine admitted. "But I learned a long time ago that second thoughts don't change reality. They just make you slower to act." Valor moved behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. She leaned back into his warmth, letting herself have this moment of vulnerability before the armor went back up. "I'm asking you to become something you never wanted to be," he said. "A warrior. A weapon. Someone who makes life and death decisions before breakfast." "You're asking me to survive," Celine corrected. "To protect the people I care about. To stand beside you instead of hiding behind you. That's not the same as making me something I'm not." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I was always capable of this. Of violence when necessary. Of making hard choices. Marcus just convinced me I wasn't. That Omegas were supposed to be soft and yielding and grateful for whatever scraps the Alphas threw us." Her hands fisted in his shirt. "But I'm done being grateful for scraps. I'm done pretending I'm weak to make other people comfortable. If the Eastern families want war, we'll give them war. And when it's over, they'll know exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." The pride in Valor's expression was fierce and genuine. "That's my queen." "Not yet," Celine said, "but I will be." Three days of brutal preparation followed. Celine worked with the healers, teaching them everything she could compress into 72 hours. Most of them were competent but conservative, trained to avoid risks and never drain themselves beyond safe limits. She taught them to push those limits when it mattered, to recognize which wounds were survivable with aggressive intervention and which ones were already lost causes, to make triage decisions in seconds instead of minutes, to accept that saving everyone wasn't possible, but saving the most you could was. Some of them looked at her like she was advocating murder. Others understood what she was really teaching, that in war, hesitation killed as surely as enemy blades, that a healer who exhausted herself trying to save someone already dying meant 2 warriors lost instead of 1. It was brutal math, ruthless calculus, but it was also survival. On the second night, Celine found Lucien in the library, surrounded by books about warfare and strategy that were way too advanced for a 7-year-old. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Father's going to war," Lucien said. His voice was small, scared. "Because of me." Celine's chest tightened. "No. Your father's going to war because traitors tried to hurt his family. That's not your fault. But if I'd been stronger—" "You're 7, Celine interrupted gently. "You're not supposed to fight off armed warriors. That's what guards are for. What your father is for." Lucien's hands clenched on the book he was holding. "Vex said I was weak, that father made me soft by protecting me too much." "Vex was a traitor and a liar," Celine said firmly. "And he died for it. Your father protects you because you're precious, because losing you would break him in ways even I can't heal. That's not weakness, that's love." She reached over, closing the book Lucien was pretending to read. "You want to help?" Really help? Lucian nodded. Then stay alive, stay safe. Let your father fight without worrying that you're in danger. That's the greatest gift you can give him right now. The boy was quiet for a long moment. Then, are you scared? Terrified, Celine admitted. I've never been in a real battle, never had to heal mass casualties, never watched people I know march off knowing some of them won't come back. But you're going anyway. Because the people I love are going, Celine said, and I refuse to sit in safety while they bleed. Lucian studied her with those unsettling golden eyes. You're going to be a good queen. I'm going to try, Celine said. That night, lying in bed beside Veilor, Celine stared at the ceiling and tried to quiet her racing thoughts. In less than 24 hours, they'd march on House Corvain. 200 wolves against fortified positions held by families who'd been preparing for this confrontation for months. The odds weren't great, but she'd survived worse odds in the Northlands. Had learned that desperation made you dangerous in ways careful planning never could. The wolves waiting behind Corvain's walls had been preparing for war, but they'd been preparing to fight a king who valued diplomacy, who preferred compromise to bloodshed, who'd spent 15 years trying to rule with wisdom instead of fear. They hadn't prepared for the king who'd watched a blade at his son's throat and decided the time for restraint was over. And they definitely hadn't prepared for a rejected Omega who'd learned that the difference between victim and survivor was just a willingness to do whatever it took to keep breathing. Tomorrow, they'd learn. Veilor's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer. You're thinking too loud. Can't help it, Celine murmured. My brain won't shut up. Tell me what you're thinking about. Whether I'm strong enough for what's coming, Celine admitted. Whether I'll freeze when it matters. Whether I'm about to get people killed because I'm pretending to be something I'm not. Veilor shifted, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at her. You killed a traitor 3 days ago using magic. Most healers don't even know can be weaponized. You've spent 72 hours teaching my healers how to function in combat conditions. You looked my son in the eyes and gave him hope when he was drowning in guilt. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You're not pretending, Celine. You're just finally letting yourself be what you've always been capable of becoming. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, people might die. But they're choosing to follow us knowing the risks, choosing to fight for an empire where Omegas can become queens and strength matters more than bloodline. What if we lose? Celine whispered. Then we lose together, Veilor said. And at least we'll have tried for something better than the world Marcus Thorne wanted to trap you in. He kissed her, slow, thorough, like they had all the time in the world instead of hours. When he finally pulled back, his expression was serious. Tomorrow, everything changes. Win or lose, there's no going back from this. The Empire will remember the Battle of Corvain's fall as the moment we either secured our future or destroyed it. I know, Celine said. And you're still sure? She thought about Marcus, about rejection and broken wrists and 3 months of bleeding in the snow, about Lucien's terrified face with a blade at his throat, about Veilor's unwavering belief that she was worth fighting for, about the woman she'd been and the woman she was becoming. I'm sure, Celine said. Barset. They marched at dawn, 200 warriors in formation moving through mountain passes with the kind of grim efficiency that came from knowing half of them might not come back. Celine rode near the front, surrounded by healers and their supplies. She'd dressed for war. Leather armor over wool, blades strapped to her thighs where she could reach them fast. Hair braided back tight enough to hurt. She looked like a warrior, felt like a fraud, but she kept her spine straight and her expression neutral, refusing to show the fear churning in her gut. Kira rode up beside her. First battle? Is it that obvious? Celine asked. Only to someone who's been through a dozen, Kira said. Her smile was grim. Advice? Don't think. Don't hesitate. When someone needs healing, you heal them. When someone needs killing, you kill them. Everything else is just noise. That simple? That's simple, Kira confirmed. Survival is just a series of ugly choices made fast enough that your brain doesn't get in the way. They rode in silence for a while. Then Kira said, For what it's worth, you've got more spine than most alphas I've served under. Whatever happens today, at least it'll be memorable. Is that supposed to be comforting? Little bit, Kira said. Then she spurred her horse forward, barking orders at the vanguard. Celine found Violor at the head of the column, studying the terrain ahead. The mountains rose like teeth against the sky, and somewhere beyond them, House Corvain waited. "How much farther?" she asked. 2 hours, Valor said. "Maybe 3. They'll see us coming long before we reach the gates. And then? Then we find out if they're smart enough to surrender or stupid enough to fight." His eyes cut to her. "Stay with the healers until the fighting starts. Once it does, I need you focused on keeping our people alive. Don't try to be a hero. What if you need me?" "Then I'll come find you," Valor said. "But Celine, if I go down, you don't try to save me. You get the healers out. You retreat to Allied territory. You survive." She wanted to argue, to tell him she'd never abandon him, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't a request. It was a command from a king preparing for the worst. "Promise me," Valor said. Celine looked at him. At the man who'd chosen her when the world said she was worthless, who'd gone to war rather than hide her, who was about to lead 200 wolves against fortifications that might kill them all. "I promise," she lied, because they both knew if it came down to it, she'd burn herself to ash before she let him die. The bond pulsed between them, warm and steady. They rode on. The mountains opened up into a narrow valley, and there, carved into the cliff face like a scar, sat House Corvain's stronghold. Massive walls, guard towers bristling with archers, gates thick enough to stop a battering ram, and standing on those walls hundreds of warriors in Corvain colors. Waiting. Valor raised his hand and the column stopped. For a long moment, there was just silence. 2 armies staring at each other across empty ground. Then Lord Corvain appeared on the battlements, his voice carrying across the valley. "King Valor, you've come a long way to die." "I've come to offer terms," Valor called back. "Surrender the families who supported Vex's coup, swear renewed loyalty to the Northern Empire, and I'll let you live." Corvain's laugh was harsh. "You're outnumbered 3 to 1. Your son was nearly killed by one of your own trusted guards. Your mate is a rejected Omega who plays at being queen, and you want us to surrender?" His smile was vicious. "I don't think so." Valor's expression didn't change. "Then you've chosen death. Remember that when your walls are burning and your warriors are bleeding." He turned to Kira. "Take the vanguard. Hit the east approach. Make them think that's our main assault." "And the real attack?" Kira asked. "West Wall," Valor said. "Where the fortifications are newest. Theron will lead that push." "What about you?" Celine asked, her stomach dropping. Valor's smile was predatory. "I'm going through the front gate." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's suicide," Theron protested. "They'll have the gates reinforced." Boiling oil. Archers, everything designed to kill anyone stupid enough to try a frontal assault. "Which is exactly why they won't expect me to actually do it," Valor said. He looked at his generals. "We have one advantage. They think I'm too smart to take unnecessary risks, too careful to gamble my life on a desperate play." He turned back to the stronghold, his eyes blazing gold. "They're about to learn that a king with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature alive." Celine's hands clenched on her reins. "Valor, trust me," he said quietly. "I've been holding back for 15 years, playing politics, making compromises, letting wolves like Corvain think they could challenge me without consequences." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same transformation she'd felt in herself 3 days ago. The moment when survival stopped being enough, and winning became the only option that mattered. Today, they learn what happens when I stop holding back. The battle horn sounded, and the world exploded into violence. The first wave hit like thunder made flesh. Kira's vanguard slammed into the east approach with enough force to shake the mountain itself. Steel met steel. Claws tore through armor. The air filled with sounds Celine had only imagined in nightmares. Screaming, snarling. The wet crunch of bones breaking under pressure no human body was designed to withstand. She sat on her horse behind the healer's line, watching 200 wolves she'd broken bread with charge toward walls designed to kill them, and understood something fundamental about warfare that no amount of preparation could have taught her. War wasn't strategy or tactics or clever positioning on maps. War was just organized murder dressed up in noble language about honor and necessity. And she was about to become very good at it. "Move the triage station closer," Celine ordered. her voice cutting through the chaos. "Within sight of the east wall, but out of direct arrow range. I want the wounded reaching us in minutes, not bleeding out during transport." The healers scrambled to obey. They were terrified. She could see it in their eyes, in the way their hands shook as they unpacked supplies. But they moved anyway, because freezing meant watching people die who might have been saved. Celine had taught them that much, at least. The first casualties arrived within minutes. A young warrior with an arrow through his shoulder. An older beta missing half her face from a sword strike that had caught her wrong. A scout who'd taken a spear to the gut and was bleeding faster than gravity should allow. Celine's hands moved without conscious thought, assessing, prioritizing, making the brutal calculations Kira had warned her about. The shoulder wound was survivable. She directed one of the junior healers to handle it. The facial injury was catastrophic, but not immediately fatal. Another healer, more experienced, one who could work reconstructive magic. The gut wound was already lost. The scout's eyes were glazing, his breath coming in wet gasps that meant his lungs were filling with blood. By the time she got him stabilized enough to transport, 3 other warriors would have bled out waiting for her attention. "Keep him comfortable," Celine told the nearest healer. Her voice came out flat, clinical. "Don't waste resources trying to save him." The healer's eyes widened in horror. "But that's an order," Celine said. She moved to the next patient, then the next. Her life weaver magic flowing through her hands in controlled bursts. Not the wild, desperate power she'd used to save Valor in the forest or kill Vex in the throne room. This was surgical, precise, just enough to seal arteries, mend critical damage, get warriors stable enough to survive until they could receive proper treatment, just enough to keep the triage line moving. The scout died behind her. She didn't look back. There would be time for guilt later, for questioning whether she'd made the right call, for wondering if she could have saved him if she'd tried. Right now, there were just more wounded arriving, more impossible choices, more lives hanging in the balance of how fast her hands could move. This was the reality of being queen that no one talked about, not the crown or the ceremonies or the political maneuvering. This, standing in blood-soaked grass, deciding who lived and who died based on calculations that reduced human beings to probabilities and resource allocation. If she survived this battle, she'd carry these deaths for the rest of her life. But she'd carry them standing. A roar echoed across the valley. Celine's head snapped up in time to see Valor's wolf form, massive and black as midnight, charging directly at House Corvain's main gate. No, he wasn't supposed to actually do it. The frontal assault was supposed to be a feint, a distraction while Theron's forces hit the weaker west wall. But there he was, leading 50 warriors in a suicide run at reinforced gates designed to withstand siege engines. Celine's heart stopped. The bond between them blazed with his fury and determination and absolute certainty that this was the only way to break the enemy's defensive formation, to force them to commit resources to the front gate while the real assault happened elsewhere. He was using himself as bait. The gates held. Boiling oil poured from the ramparts. Arrows fell like rain. Warriors screamed as their fur ignited, as silver-tipped projectiles found gaps in their defenses, as the kind of warfare humans had perfected over millennia proved that even supernatural strength had limits. Valor hit the gates at full speed. The impact shook the mountain, wood cracked, iron bent, but the gates held. He hit them again, and on the 4th impact, something inside the mechanism broke. The gates shuddered, listing at an angle that meant the internal bracing had failed. Valor's warriors poured through the gap before Corvain's defenders could respond. The courtyard beyond became a meat grinder. Close quarters combat where shifter advantages meant nothing, and it came down to who was more willing to die to take the enemy with them. Celine felt every wound Valor took through the bond. A spear grazing his ribs, claws raking across his shoulder, a sword that would have taken his head if he hadn't twisted at the last second. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand frozen in the triage line while the man she loved bled on stones a mile away, and her gift was useless to help him. "My lady," one of the healers said urgently, "we need you." Celine forced herself to focus. A warrior lay on the treatment table, her entire left side mangled from what looked like a fall from the wall, bones jutting through skin, internal bleeding visible in the distension of her abdomen. Survivable. Barely. Celine's hands moved over the worst of the damage, her magic flowing in controlled pulses. sealing the largest bleeds, setting bones into rough alignment, doing enough to keep the warrior from dying in the next 10 minutes while she moved to the next patient, and the next, and the next. Time became fluid, minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. Just an endless parade of broken bodies and impossible choices, and the growing pile of corpses covered by sheets that no one had time to move. Then a cheer went up from the battlefield. Celine looked up, her hand still buried in someone's chest cavity, and saw the west wall collapsing. Theron's forces had broken through. Warriors in Valor's colors were flooding into the stronghold from two directions, catching Corvain's defenders in a pincer that was rapidly becoming a slaughter. The battle wasn't over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. House Corvain had lost. By the time Celine made it into the stronghold, the fighting had devolved into pockets of resistance being systematically eliminated. Bodies littered the courtyards. Blood ran in literal rivers down the stone channels designed to drain rainwater. The air reeked of death and smoke, and the particular stench of bowels released in final moments. She found Valor in what had been Corvain's throne room. He was in human form again, covered in blood and burns and cuts that should have killed him twice over. But he was standing, breathing, alive. Lord Corvain knelt at his feet, surrounded by captured warriors wearing Eastern family colors. The man's face was a mask of defiant rage, barely containing fear. "You've won," Corvain spat. "Congratulations. You've just started a war that will consume the entire Northlands." "I've ended one," Valor corrected. His voice was rough, scraped raw from shifting and fighting and screaming orders across a battlefield. "The war started when you and your allies decided a rejected Omega wasn't worthy of being queen. When you sent assassins after me, when you helped Vex infiltrate my palace and threaten my son." He crouched down, getting eye level with Corvain. "This isn't the beginning, it's the conclusion. And history will remember it as the day the Eastern families learned that challenging me has consequences." "You can't kill us all," another captured Alpha said. His name was something Ashford, Celine remembered from the War Council briefings. "We have allies, families who'll avenge us." "Watch me," Valor said. The room went silent. Celine moved to his side, her presence drawing every eye. She was covered in blood. None of it hers. Her hands were steady despite having been wrist-deep in dying warriors for hours. Her expression was calm despite the horror she'd witnessed. She looked like exactly what she'd become. A healer who'd learned to weaponize her gift. An Omega who'd stopped apologizing for her existence. A woman who'd walked through fire and come out forged into something harder. A queen. "These families supported treason," Celine said quietly. "They funded assassins. They helped murder loyal guards and threaten a child. And you're asking us to show them mercy?" "I'm asking you to be smart," Corvain said desperately. "Killing us makes martyrs. It gives the other families justification to unite against you. And letting you live makes me look weak," Valor said. "It tells every Alpha in the Empire that they can attempt coups and face no real consequences, that my patience can be exploited indefinitely." He stood, towering over the kneeling prisoners. "I'm done being patient." "Your Majesty," Kira said from the doorway. Her armor was dented, her face streaked with soot and blood. "We've secured the stronghold. Remaining defenders have surrendered. Casualties on our side are significant but manageable." "How many did we lose?" Valor asked. 43 dead, Kira said. Her voice was flat, clinical. "Another 60 wounded badly enough they won't fight again for months. Maybe longer." Celine felt each death like a physical blow. 43 wolves who'd followed Valor into battle and wouldn't be going home. 43 families who'd received news that would shatter their worlds. 43 deaths she might have prevented if she'd been faster, smarter, better. But that was the poison of responsibility. The understanding that no matter how hard you worked, how much you sacrificed, it would never be enough to save everyone. Leadership meant carrying those deaths anyway, learning to function under the weight of all the people you'd failed. "Execute the ringleaders," Valor said. "Corvain, Ashford, anyone who funded or planned the coup. Make it public. Make it visible. Let every family in the Empire see what happens to traitors." "And the others?" Theron asked. "The warriors who were just following orders." "Conscript them," Celine said. Both men turned to look at her. She met Valor's eyes steadily. "They lost. Their lords are dead or about to be. Give them a choice. Swear loyalty to the Empire and serve in the border territories for 10 years, or face execution alongside their leaders. That's mercy, Corvain snarled. You think that makes you better than us? No, Celine said. I think it makes me practical. Dead warriors can't rebuild what you destroyed. Living ones can. Even if they hate me for the rest of their lives, they can still serve a purpose. She looked at Valor. We need to be feared, but we also need to be smart. Mass executions create blood feuds that last generations. Strategic mercy creates a warrior class that owes us their lives. The room was silent. Then Valor nodded slowly. Do it. Anyone who swears the oath lives. Anyone who refuses joins their lords. He turned back to Corvain. You have until sunset to make peace with whatever you believe comes next. Then he walked out of the throne room, Celine at his side, leaving Kira and Theron to handle the executions. They made it to a private chamber before Valor's legs gave out. Celine caught him, easing him down onto a bench. Her hands moved over his injuries automatically, cataloging the damage. Burns, lacerations, cracked ribs, a shoulder that was probably dislocated. Nothing immediately fatal, but enough accumulated trauma that a normal wolf would have collapsed hours ago. You're an idiot, she said, her magic already flowing into the worst injuries. A suicidal, reckless idiot who almost got himself killed charging gates designed to stop armies. But it worked, Valor said. His smile was pained. We broke through, won the battle, proved that Eastern families can't stand against us. We lost 43 warriors, Celine said. Her voice cracked. 43 people who trusted you, who believed in what we're building, who died because you needed to make a statement. I know, Valor said quietly. His hand covered hers, stilling her frantic healing. I know, Celine, and I'll carry every one of them, but that's what leadership means. Making calls that get people killed in service of something larger. His eyes met hers, and she saw the weight he was carrying, the cost of being king. If I'd held back, if I'd played it safe, we might have lost. And then everything we've fought for dies with us. So yes, I made the brutal choice. I spent lives like currency to buy victory, and I'll do it again if I have to. Celine's throat tightened. She understood, hated that she understood. But that was the transformation they'd both undergone. The shift from people who wanted to be good to people who settled for being effective. We're not the people we were 4 months ago, she said. No, Valor agreed. We're not. You were a rejected Omega who believed the world when it said you were worthless. I was a king who thought patience and diplomacy could solve everything. And now? Now you're a woman who kills traitors and makes triage decisions that save armies. Valor's hand moved to cup her face. And I'm a king who's done compromising with wolves who mistake restraint for weakness. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd been broken and reforged into something the world hadn't been ready for. Then Valor said quietly, I love you. The words hit like a physical impact. Simple, direct, absolutely sincere. Celine's eyes burned. You're just figuring that out now? After I've spent weeks watching you plan wars and risk your life and terrify everyone in a 50-mile radius? I've known since the forest, Valor admitted. Since I woke up to find a stranger had sacrificed her own life force to save mine. But saying it makes it real. Makes it something I can't take back if you decide this life is too brutal for you. Celine laughed. It came out wet, half sob. You think after everything we've been through, I'm going to walk away because you finally admitted you love me? She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. I love you too, you stubborn, reckless, impossible man. I love you despite the war and the violence and the impossible choices. I love you because you looked at a rejected Omega and saw a queen. Because you went to war rather than hide me. Because you make me want to be someone worthy of that loyalty. The bond between them blazed, stronger than ever. Valor kissed her. Slow. Thorough. Like they had all the time in the world instead of a stronghold full of prisoners to process and bodies to bury and an empire to rebuild. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Celine said, We should get married. Valor blinked. Right now? Eventually, Celine clarified. After we've dealt with the aftermath, after the executions and the oaths and the political fallout. But yes, soon, Because I'm tired of being your future queen. I want to be your actual queen. The smile that crossed Valor's face was genuine, unguarded, the expression of a man who'd stopped carrying the weight of the world alone. Then we'll do it under the northern lights, he said. Traditional ceremony. Every family in the empire invited. Let them all see the rejected Omega who became the most powerful woman in the Northlands. The executions happened at sunset. Celine stood on the ramparts beside Valor, watching as Corvain and the other ringleaders were brought out into the courtyard. The surviving warriors from both sides had been assembled to witness, hundreds of wolves standing in grim silence. This was justice. Swift, public, designed to send a message that would echo across every territory in the Empire. But that didn't make it any easier to watch. Lord Corvain, Valor's voice carried across the courtyard. You stand convicted of treason, of conspiracy to murder, of funding assassins and supporting a coup against the Northern Empire. Do you have anything to say? Corvain spat blood. History will remember me as a patriot who tried to stop you from destroying everything our ancestors built. History is written by the victors, Valor said. And you lost. The executioner's blade fell. One by one, the conspirators faced the same fate. Some went quietly. Some screamed defiance. Some begged for mercy that wasn't coming. Celine watched them all die and felt nothing. That should have disturbed her. The old Celine would have been horrified by her own emotional numbness, would have questioned what kind of person could watch executions without flinching. But the old Celine had died in the snow alongside her illusions about the world being fair. This Celine understood that some wolves needed to die so others could live. That mercy in one moment often meant cruelty in the next. That being queen meant making peace with blood on your hands. When it was over, when the bodies had been removed and the courtyard washed clean, Valor addressed the assembled warriors. The Eastern families attempted to destroy everything we've built. They failed. And now they've learned the cost of that failure. His eyes swept the crowd, landing on the captured warriors who'd sworn loyalty oaths. But we're not monsters. We're not tyrants who rule through fear alone. Anyone who swears loyalty to this empire, who serves with honor, will find a place here, regardless of bloodline, regardless of past allegiances. He gestured to Celine. This woman standing beside me was rejected, discarded, left to die by wolves who thought Omega blood made her worthless. But she survived. She saved my life. She killed a traitor with nothing but her will, and in 2 weeks she'll be crowned Luna Queen of the Northern Empire. The courtyard was silent. Then one warrior began to kneel, then another, until every wolf in the courtyard was on their knees before them, not out of fear, out of recognition that the world had changed, that strength mattered more than tradition, that a rejected Omega had proven herself more worthy of leadership than the alphas who tried to tear her down. Celine stood in the center of it all and felt the weight of 43 deaths pressing against her chest. Felt the responsibility of every warrior who'd just sworn loyalty, felt the impossible burden of being what these wolves needed her to be. But she stood anyway, because that was what survivors did. They carried the weight. They made the impossible choices. They became what the world demanded and learned to live with who they'd had to become. The journey back to the Frost Palace took 3 days. They moved slowly, carrying wounded and prisoners. The army that had marched out with grim determination returned exhausted and bloodied but victorious. Celine spent most of the journey in the healers' wagons, tending to warriors who'd survived the battle but still needed intensive care. Her Life Weaver gift had been pushed to its absolute limits. She was running on willpower and stubbornness, and the knowledge that these wolves had bled for her. The least she could do was make sure as many of them as possible survived to see home. On the second night, camped in a mountain pass, she found herself sitting by the fire beside an older warrior named Bren. He'd lost an arm in the battle, but survived thanks to Celine's quick intervention during triage. "You made the right call," he said suddenly, "with the scout, the one you let die to save others." Celine stiffened. "How did you—" "I was conscious when they brought me in," Bren said. "Saw you make the choice. Saw the way it broke something in you to do it." He shifted, his remaining hand gesturing to where his left arm used to be. "I've been a warrior for 30 years, fought in a dozen battles, And the hardest lesson I ever learned was that trying to save everyone means watching everyone die. You have to make the brutal choices. Prioritize. Accept that some deaths are inevitable. His eyes met hers in the firelight. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you a leader. And these wolves need leaders more than they need someone who's kind but ineffective. Celine's throat tightened. I'm not sure I can live with the person I'm becoming. Then you're still human, Bren said. The ones who sleep easy after making those calls are the ones you have to watch out for. You'll carry those deaths. They'll haunt you, but you'll carry them standing, and that's what matters. They reached the Frost Palace on the third day to find Lucien waiting at the gates, practically vibrating with impatience. The boy launched himself at Valor the moment he dismounted, arms wrapping around his father's neck with enough force to stagger him. I'm all right, Valor said, his voice rough. We're all right. Lucien pulled back, his eyes finding Celine. You came back. I promised I would, Celine said. The boy hesitated, then moved to her, hugging her with the same fierce intensity he'd shown his father. You're not leaving again, are you? Not if I can help it, Celine said, her arms coming up to hold him close. Over Lucien's head she met Valor's eyes. He was smiling, tired, battered, but genuinely happy in a way she'd never seen before. This was what they'd fought for. Not territory or power or political dominance. This, a child who felt safe enough to love openly. A family built on choice instead of obligation. A future where rejected Omegas could become queens and strength mattered more than bloodline. It was a small thing. Fragile. Easily destroyed by the kind of wolves who valued tradition over progress. But it was theirs, and they'd defend it with everything they had. The wedding happened 2 weeks later under the Northern Lights. Every major family in the Empire attended. Some because they genuinely supported Valor and Celine. Others because refusing the invitation would have been political suicide. Celine stood in her chambers, staring at her reflection and barely recognizing the woman looking back. The dress was a masterpiece. Deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like captured starlight. Her hair was woven with crystals that sparkled like ice. She looked like royalty, felt like a fraud. Second thoughts? Nara asked, adjusting the dress one final time. Constant thoughts, Celine admitted. I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here, that I'm just an Omega playing dress-up. You killed a traitor with forbidden magic, Nara said. You made triage decisions that saved an army. You stood on ramparts and watched executions without flinching. If that's playing dress-up, I'd hate to see you when you're serious. She stepped back, studying Celine critically. You're not the woman who stumbled into this palace 4 months ago. You're not even the woman who rode to war 2 weeks ago. You're someone new, someone stronger, or someone broken, Celine said quietly. Both, Nara said, and that's all right. The world breaks everyone. What matters is what you build from the pieces. A knock at the door. Kira stepped in, her formal armor polished to a mirror shine. It's time. Celine took a deep breath. Then let's go make me a queen. The ceremony took place in the palace's great hall, beneath windows that showed the aurora borealis dancing across the sky. Hundreds of wolves packed the space. Nobles and warriors, alphas and omegas, families that had supported them and families that had tried to destroy them. All of them watching as Celine Vera walked down the aisle toward the man who'd chosen her when the world said she was worthless. Valor stood at the altar in formal regalia, his eyes never leaving hers. Beside him, Lucien held the ceremonial crown, his expression serious beyond his years. The officiant spoke words about bonds and duty and the sacred responsibility of leadership. Celine barely heard them. She was too focused on Valor, on the man who'd seen her at her lowest and believed she could rise higher. Do you, Valor Drucker, King of the Northern Empire, take this woman as your mate and Luna Queen? I do, Valor said. His voice carried across the silent hall. And do you, Celine Vera, accept this bond and all the responsibilities it carries? Celine thought about Marcus, about rejection and broken wrists and 3 months of bleeding in the snow, about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. I do, she said. The bond between them blazed, completing a connection that had started in a frozen forest with a dying king and a healer who refused to let him die. Lucien stepped forward, holding up the crown. It was delicate, beautiful. and heavy with the weight of every decision she'd have to make wearing it. Valor took the crown, his hand steady. "Then kneel, my love, and rise a queen." Celine knelt. The crown settled on her head, cool metal against her skin. When she rose, she was no longer just Celine Vera. She was Luna, Queen of the Northern Empire, mate to the most powerful king in the Northlands, mother to a prince who needed her, leader to wolves who'd sworn loyalty with their blood. The hall erupted in cheers, but Celine was focused on Valor, on the man who'd gambled everything on a rejected Omega and won. She kissed him. Deep. Thorough. In front of every witness who'd ever doubted her. And when they finally broke apart, she turned to face the assembled wolves. Her wolves now. Her responsibility. Her empire. Some of them were smiling. Some looked uncertain. Some still wore the resentment of families who'd been forced to accept her. She didn't care. She'd survived rejection. Survived the Northlands alone. Survived war and triage and executions. Survived becoming someone she barely recognized. She'd survived this too. 3 months ago, Marcus Thorne rejected you, Valor said, his voice carrying across the hall. He threw you away like you were nothing, left you to die in the snow. He turned to her, his smile fierce. Look at you now. Celine looked out at the sea of faces, at the empire she'd fought for, at the future she'd helped build, and she smiled, cold, sharp, unforgiving, the smile of a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself into something the world hadn't been ready for. The smile of a queen. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had dispersed, Celine found herself on the palace ramparts, alone, staring out at mountains painted silver by moonlight. The northern lights danced overhead, painting the sky in colors that had no names. Valor joined her, settling against the stone beside her. His hand found hers. Regrets? He asked quietly. Celine considered. She thought about the scouts she'd let die, about the 43 warriors who'd followed them to war and not come home, about the execution she'd watched and the person she'd had to become to survive. None, she said finally, or too many to count. I'm not sure which. Both, Valor said. That's leadership. Carrying regrets you can't change, and choices you'd make again. They stood in silence, two people who'd been forged in fire and blood into something harder than either had expected to become. You know what the strangest part is? Celine said. I spent my entire life believing the world when it told me I was worthless, that Omega blood made me less than, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps the Alphas threw me. She turned to face him. And now I'm standing here wearing a crown, commanding armies, making decisions that shape the empire. And I still wake up some mornings expecting it all to be a dream, expecting to find myself back in that forest, bleeding and alone. But you're not, Valor said. You're here. You're real. And you earned every bit of this. At what cost? Celine whispered. At whatever cost necessary, Valor said, because the alternative was dying in the snow, was letting Marcus Thorne's rejection define you, was accepting that the world was right when it said you didn't matter. His hands framed her face, tilting her head back so their eyes locked. You matter, Celine. You always did. It just took the world a while to notice. Celine's eyes burned. I love you. I know, Valor said. And I love you. Even the parts of you that scare me. Even the parts you're still learning to live with. Below them, the palace was settling into night. Their empire. Their responsibility. Their future. Celine leaned into Valor's warmth and let herself feel the weight of everything they'd built. Every sacrifice. Every impossible choice. Every death they'd carry for the rest of their lives. It was heavy. Brutal. Sometimes unbearable. But it was theirs, and that was enough. 3 months later, Celine stood in the healer's wing, teaching a new generation of medical students the techniques she'd developed during the war. The triage line had become standard protocol across the empire, saving more lives than the old methods ever had. But it still required making impossible choices. Still meant watching some warriors die so others could live. The students struggled with it. She could see the conflict in their eyes, the desire to save everyone running headlong into the reality that trying to save everyone meant watching everyone die. You'll carry the ones you can't save, Celine told them. Every face, every name, every moment you had to choose who lived and who died. That weight never gets lighter. She met each of their eyes in turn, but you'll carry them standing, because that's what healers do. We don't just mend bodies. We make the brutal choices that keep armies functioning. We become the kind of people who can look death in the face and decide who deserves a chance at life. A young Omega student raised her hand. How do you live with it? The guilt? You don't, Celine said honestly. You just learn to function despite it. You find people who understand. You hold on to the lives you saved instead of drowning in the ones you lost. And you remember that every warrior who survives because of your triage decision is someone who gets to go home. She thought about Bren, about the scout, about the 43 who'd died, and the 117 who'd lived because of choices she'd made in seconds. It's not enough, Celine said quietly. It's never enough. But it's what we have. So we do our best and carry the rest. The students nodded, their expressions grim but determined. They'd learn, the way she had. Through blood and impossible choices and nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering if they'd become monsters. But they'd learn standing, because that was what survival meant. Teat. That evening, Celine found Lucien in the library again. He was older now, growing fast, already showing signs of the king he'd someday become. Reading about war again, she asked, settling into the chair beside him. Reading about peace, Lucien corrected. About how empires rebuild after conflict. How to turn enemies into allies. Smart, Celine said. Your father could use more advisors who think that way. Lucien looked up at her. Do you ever wish things had been different? That you'd never been rejected? Never had to fight? Celine considered. Every day, she admitted. I wish I'd never known what it felt like to have my wrist broken by someone who swore to protect me. I wish I'd never had to learn how to make triage decisions. I wish I could sleep through the night without seeing the faces of warriors I couldn't save. But if things had been different, I'd still be in the Blood Moon Pack. Still believing I was worthless. Still accepting scraps and calling it enough. Celine's voice hardened. I wouldn't have met your father. Wouldn't have you. Wouldn't have learned that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined. She reached over, ruffling his hair. Pain shapes us, breaks us, forces us to rebuild into something stronger or crumble entirely. I chose to rebuild. And yeah, some days that choice feels impossible. But it's mine, and I'm proud of it. Lucien was quiet for a moment. When I'm king, he said finally, I want to build an empire where Omegas don't have to nearly die to prove they're valuable. Then you'll be a better king than most, Celine said. Just remember that change takes time, and sometimes it takes violence. The world doesn't give up power easily. I know, Lucien said. You and father taught me that. Dimpeak. Under the northern lights, 1 year after the wedding, Celine stood on the palace ramparts with Veilor. The empire was stable. The eastern families had learned their lesson. New alliances had been forged in the aftermath of war. But the cost of that stability was written in scar tissue, and sleepless nights and the weight both of them carried. Do you think we made the right choices? Veilor asked quietly. I think we made the only choices we could live with, Celine said. Whether they were right or wrong, history will decide. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. We're not perfect. We've made mistakes, lost people, become harder than we ever wanted to be, but we're still standing, still fighting for something better. And that has to count for something. It counts for everything, Veilor said. They stood together, two people who'd been broken by the world and rebuilt themselves into something it hadn't been ready for. A rejected Omega who'd become a queen, a patient king who'd learned when to stop compromising, a family forged in blood and magic and impossible choices. The northern lights danced overhead, painting their empire in colors that had no names. And Celine Veira, Luna Queen of the Northern Empire, looked out at the future they'd fought for and smiled. Not the cold, sharp smile of a weapon, but the quiet, genuine smile of someone who'd survived what should have killed her and learned to build something beautiful from the ruins. The end. They say an Omega without a mate is nothing but dead weight waiting for the grave. I used to believe that lie. Then I got rejected, left bleeding in the snow, and decided that survival was just the beginning. Now I stand as Luna Queen of the Northern Empire, wearing a crown forged from the broken pieces of who I used to be. The journey from rejected Omega to ruling Queen wasn't pretty. It cost blood and tears and parts of my soul I'll never get back. But it taught me something the world tries to hide from people like me. That strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every single time. About becoming someone the world has to acknowledge, whether it wants to or not. About turning the pain that should have destroyed you into power that can't be ignored. I am Celine Vera, and this is my story.